It was a cold, gray afternoon in New York City. The streets bustled with people rushing home, umbrellas swaying in the wind, heads down to avoid the drizzle. Inside a corner apartment on the 14th floor of a luxury high-rise, a little girl lay in bed, her tiny face pale, her breaths shallow. Her name was Emma. She was only 7. Her father, Richard Bennett, was one of the city's most feared and respected CEOs. Billionaire. Ruthless negotiator. A man who could close a deal worth $100 million before breakfast but somehow couldn't convince anyone to care for his sick daughter when he needed it most. It wasn't that Richard didn't love Emma, he did. She was all he had left after losing his wife to cancer 2 years ago. But his world had become walls of glass, boardrooms, and conference calls. The people around him were employees, not friends. Associates, not family. And today, when Emma's fever spiked dangerously high and she could barely breathe, there was no one to help. Richard called his assistant. She said she was too busy with a meeting. He called his driver. Off duty. He even called the building concierge. Sorry, sir, not my job. He stood by the window, panic clawing at his chest, wondering how the richest man in the building could feel so utterly powerless. And then came the knock. It was Daniel. The delivery guy from down the street, the one who always brought Richard's takeout orders on time. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a worn brown jacket, with tired eyes and hands that looked like they'd seen hard days. Daniel lived paycheck to paycheck, raising his little boy, Caleb, alone. He was supposed to be delivering soup Richard had ordered for Emma. But the moment Daniel stepped in and saw the child's condition, her trembling lips, the way her chest heaved with each breath, his instincts kicked in. Sir, she needs a hospital. Now. Richard hesitated. I'm calling for a car. No time. Daniel's voice cut through the air. He scooped Emma up gently, cradling her against his chest like she was his own. Without asking permission, without thinking twice, he bolted down the hall, through the lobby, out into the rain. Richard followed, stunned, trying to process what was happening. Daniel's sneakers pounded against the wet pavement as he ran 2 blocks to the nearest urgent care, Emma's head nestled under his chin. Hang on, sweetheart, he murmured. You're gonna be okay. By the time they burst through the clinic doors, a nurse rushed them inside. Emma had severe pneumonia. The doctor said another hour's delay could have been fatal. Richard sank into a chair, his head in his hands, shaken to his core. He watched as Daniel paced the hallway, nervous, as if she were his own child in that bed. Why did you do that? Richard asked later, his voice hoarse. Daniel shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. I've been there. My boy got sick once, and no one helped me. I swore if I ever saw another kid like that, I wouldn't wait for someone else to care. It was a simple answer, but it hit Richard like a punch. In all his years of building empires, he'd never realized how easy it was to miss the humanity in people, the real wealth that came from hearts, not bank accounts. Over the next few days, Richard stayed at the hospital. So did Daniel. He brought snacks for Emma, told her silly stories, and even got her to smile through her oxygen mask. When Emma was finally discharged, she reached out from her wheelchair and held Daniel's hand. Can you still come visit me? She asked softly. Daniel glanced at Richard, unsure. Richard smiled, really smiled, maybe for the first time in years. I was hoping you'd say yes. From then on, Daniel and his son became part of their lives. Dinners together. Park trips. Movie nights. The cold, glass-walled apartment felt a little warmer. And as for Richard, the man who had once thought he had everything, realized he had been missing the one thing that mattered most, connection. It wasn't the billions that saved his daughter that day. It was a delivery guy's heart, and the love of a single dad who refused to walk away. Richard found himself thinking about Daniel more than he expected. Not just because of what he had done for Emma, but because of the way he did it, with no hesitation, no thought of reward. One evening, a week after Emma's recovery, Richard invited Daniel and Caleb over for dinner. It wasn't the kind of dinner Richard usually hosted. No fine china, no expensive wine. Just pizza boxes on the coffee table and Emma's favorite animated movie playing in the background. Emma sat between Caleb and Daniel, giggling as Caleb made silly faces. Richard watched, realizing it had been a long time since he'd heard his daughter laugh so freely. Later that night, as Daniel was leaving, Richard stopped him at the door. "I've been thinking. Maybe you could help me out. Not as a delivery guy. As someone I can trust with Emma. You know her now, and she trusts you." Daniel frowned. "You don't need to pay me to be a friend." Richard shook his head. "I'm not paying you for that. I'm asking because I don't want to go back to being the man who has no one to call when something goes wrong. Anne. I think Emma needs you around as much as I do." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "All right. But only if it means you join us for pizza night at my place too." Over the months, the bond between them deepened. Richard learned about Daniel's struggles, the long hours, the nights he went without sleep just to make sure Caleb had everything he needed. And Daniel saw a side of Richard no one else did, the father who still kept his late wife's photo on his desk, the man who had built walls around himself not out of arrogance, but out of grief. One snowy evening, the four of them walked home from the park together. Emma and Caleb ran ahead, leaving Richard and Daniel trailing behind. "You know," Daniel said, his breath clouding in the cold air, "I think we're both learning how to be dads all over again." Richard smiled. "No. I think I'm just learning how to be human again." Daniel chuckled. "Well, you're doing a decent job." As they reached the apartment building, Emma turned back, cheeks flushed from the cold, and shouted, "Hurry up, dads." Both men froze for a second. Daniel's eyes widened, and Richard felt a strange warmth spread in his chest. Maybe it was the way Emma said it without thinking. Maybe it was the way Daniel didn't correct her. But in that moment, Richard knew something had shifted forever. It wasn't just about a life saved anymore. It was about lives changed, 3 of them, maybe 4. And in a city full of strangers, they'd somehow found a family.